Hello everyone, I'm Leela Prabhugaonkar and today we'll discuss chapter 3 that is economic reform since 1991 for standard 11th. Okay. In these economic reforms, we'll be learning about liberalization, privatization and globalization. Okay. After 40 years of planned development, India has been able to achieve a strong industrial base and became self-sufficient in the production of food grains. So, most of the thing is that most of the people they used to depend on agriculture for its livelihood. But in 1991, a crisis in the balance of payments led to the introduction of economic reforms. Okay, so balance of payment is nothing but a difference between your import and export. So we used to import more of goods from other countries. So that's why there was a need for economic reforms in India. This unit is an appraisal of the reform process and its implications for India. So liberalization, privatization and globalization and appraisal. So we'll understand about the background of the reform policies which are introduced in India. Then we understand the mechanism through which reform policies were introduced. Then we will be able to comprehend the process of globalization and its implications for India. And we'll be aware about the impact of the reforms process in various sectors. Okay, so we'll start. Former President of India, that is K.R. Narayanan, has said there is a consensus in the world today that economic development is not all and the GDP is not necessarily a measure of progress of a society. So, we'll start with the background of how the background of Indian economic system, that we know that there was India in 1991 we met with the economic crisis relating to its external debt. So there was more debt as India was not able to pay off all its debt. So the government was not able to make repayments on its borrowings from abroad. Okay, so whatever government was borrowing from the abroad funds, the loans what they used to take, they were not able to pay it back. So foreign exchange reserves also they have to maintain the foreign exchange reserves if we want to purchase anything from the foreign countries. So these were not sufficient to meet the Indian requirements, so which we generally maintain to import petroleum and other important items. It dropped the levels. Okay, so there was less of reserves. Okay, and it was not sufficient to run in India with those available funds. So the crisis were further compounded by rising prices of essential goods. So how they did is they raised the prices of the all the essential commodities, and all this led the government to introduce a new set of policy measures. Okay, we changed the direction of our developmental strategies. So in this chapter, we'll be looking at the background of all the crisis measures that the government has adopted and their impact on various sectors of the economy. Okay. So background, the origin of the financial crisis can be traced from the inefficient management of the Indian economy in 1980s. So we know that for implementing various policies and its general administration, the government generates funds from various sources like taxation, to running of public sector enterprise and all. So when expenditure is more than the income, government borrows to finance the deficit from banks and also from people within the country and from international financial institutions. Okay, so what happens is when the expenditure is more, government borrows. Okay, from the bank and from other financial institutions. So similarly, when we import goods like petroleum, we pay in dollars. Okay, whatever we earn from our exports. So these two things are very important. Exports we require to fund the imports. Okay. So development policies required that even though the revenues were very low, even though the revenue means whatever the earnings were very low, earnings were very low, the government had to overshoot its revenue to meet challenges. So even though the Indian revenues was low that time, but they had to do something to meet the challenges like unemployment, poverty, population explosion. Okay, and so this continued spending on development programs of the government, it did not generate additional revenues. So the government was not able to generate sufficient fund, okay, from internal sources like taxation, what they used to apply. So when the government was spending a large share of its income on areas which do not provide immediate returns, such as the social sectors and defense, there was a need to utilize the rest of its revenue in a highly efficient manner. So the income from public sector undertakings were also not very high to meet the foreign exchange. So at times, our foreign exchange borrowed from other countries and international financial institutions. So basically, we spent on meeting all the consumptions. Then, what happened in the late 1980s was that government expenditure it began to increase. Okay, increase. So expenditure increased than the revenue. Okay, and we were not able to pay back all the revenues during those time, because our export was so less. Okay, so imports grew at a very high rate without matching growth of export. So foreign exchange reserves also declined because we were not having that much of fund. Okay, foreign exchange reserves we were not having because our export declined. Okay, and we used to import more at that time. So there was also not sufficient foreign exchange to pay the interest that needed to be paid to international lenders. So also no country or international funder was willing to lend to India, because Indians reserves were so less that no other country was willing to help India. So what India did was that they approached the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD. Okay, so this is popularly known as World Bank, and they also approached International Monetary Fund, IMF. So from this they received 7 billion as a loan to manage the crisis. So for willing to take this loan, the international agencies, they what they expected from India is just to liberalize and open the economy. Okay, so earlier before 1991 they have put some restrictions on the Indian economy. Okay, like restrictions on the private sector, then globalization was one of the main restrictions. Okay, so once India got independence, they were not allowing any foreign company to come into India for their businesses. Okay, so re- so these were so many things, and they put they expected India to liberalize and to remove the restrictions on private sector. Then also they told to reduce the role of the government in many areas and remove trade restrictions between India and other countries. Okay, so India agreed to the conditionalities of World Bank. So India agreed to this, and then they form a new economic policies. Okay, so the new economic policies consisted of wide-ranging economic reforms. So this was for creating a more competitive environment. Okay, this they framed because of just to frame a more competitive environment in the economy, and they wanted to remove all the barriers to entry. Okay, and growth of firms. So this set of policies can broadly be classified into two groups. First is stabilization measures and the structural reform measures. Okay, so stabilization measures are short term measures. Okay, these are the short term measures intended to correct some weakness like the balance of payment and to bring inflation under control. Okay, and to bring inflation under control. So in the other word, this means that there was a need to maintain sufficient foreign exchange reserves and keep the rising prices under control. On the other hand, structural reform policies are long-term measures aimed at improving the efficiency of the economy and increasing its international competitiveness by removing the rigidities in various segments of the Indian economy. So the government initiated a variety of policies which fall under three heads like liberalization, privatization and globalization. So we'll first see what is liberalization. So this was introduced to put an end to these restrictions and open various sectors of the economy. So here they opened various sectors of economy through a few liberalization measures were introduced in 1980s in areas of industrial licensing, export-import policy, technology upgradation, fiscal policy and foreign investment. So these reforms policies initiated in 1991. So now we'll see the different areas, that is what has happened to our industrial sector, financial sector, okay, tax reforms, foreign exchange market. So and trade and investment sector, which received a greater attention in which in and after 1991. So deregulation of industrial sector. So in India, regulatory mechanisms were enforced in various ways. So mechanisms were enforced. Industrial licensing, under which every entrepreneur, they had to get permission from government officials to start a firm. So what government did is whatever, like if for the industrial sector, they told that you have to get a permission from the government, okay, in order to run your business, or close a firm or decide the amount of goods that could be produced. Then second one is private sector was not allowed in many industries. And the third, some goods could be produced only in small scale industries. And fourth one is control on price fixation and distribution of selected industrial products. Then the reform policies introduced in in and after 1991, these were removed many of these restrictions. Industrial licensing was abolished for almost all but product categories like alcohol, cigarettes, and some hazardous chemicals, industrial explosives, electronics, aerospace, and drugs and pharmaceuticals. So the only industries which are now reserved for which were reserved for public sectors, these were part of the energy generation, atomic energy generation, and some activities of railway transport. So many goods produced by small scale industries have now been de-reserved. So then if we see the financial sectors, so financial sectors, this includes all those commercial banks, investment banks, stock exchange operations, foreign exchange market and all. So the financial sector is in India, it is regulated by Reserve Bank of India, which is the apex bank, okay. Then the RBI decides the amount of money that the banks can keep with themselves, okay, and then they fix the interest rate, nature of lending to various sectors, okay. So one of the major aims of financial sector reforms is to reduce the role of RBI from regulator to facilitator of financial sector. So this means that the financial sector may be allowed to take decisions on many matters without consulting the RBI, okay. Then the reform policies led to the establishment of private sector banks, India as well as the foreign sectors. So foreign investment limit in banks was raised to around 74%, and those banks which fulfill certain conditions have been given freedom to set up a new branches without the approval of the RBI and rationalize their existing branch networks. Then, through banks have been given permission to generate resources from India and abroad, certain managerial aspects have been retained with RBI to safeguard the interests of the account holders and the nation. Foreign institutional investors such as merchant banks, mutual funds, pensions, these are now allowed to enter into the Indian market. So these were the things what happened. We'll discuss more things with regards to liberalization for second part. Thank you for watching my video.